These are our defensive coordinators I have next to me. If you are on podcast, do not worry. We will get to it. I do want to say hello to Blue Wolverine here in the chat. Blue Wolverine, thanks for being with us. I got Wink Martindale higher than Sam, Blue Wolverine. So look at me. I mean, I'm the Buckeye fan on this show, and I got the Michigan defensive corner. Doesn't feel right, but I'll go with it. So thanks for being here. And then Philip had this funny comment. He said, "Has Iowa ever had a receiver that wasn't a tight end?" It's been a while, not in recent memory, but that's a good one there, Philip. All right. I'll go first with the defensive coordinators. I'll keep this one shorter, a little bit more simple, and then Sam, I'll let you go with yours. So I'm actually going to start with the from the top this time. I have Jim Knowles, number one. There really wasn't all that much arguing there for me, especially when you see what he did at Ohio State. I don't think people realize how talentless that Ohio State defense was when he first got there. And then to kind of build that up, get some guys from the transfer portal and stuff. And I mean, Caleb Downs wanted to come to Ohio State because of that Jim Knowles defense and what he was able to do with him and kind of some of the stuff he sold on him there. So Jim Knowles, I know Buckeye fans are not fond of him. I couldn't really care less as a Buckeye fan, but they're not really fond of him. That's okay. But Jim Knowles still amazing. And Phil Parker, I mean, he's been one, two, or three for me for years in the Big Ten with how good he is. Just he had the number one defense, I think, 2, 3 years ago. This last year fell off a little bit. That was really only for a couple games, and I think there was some maybe personality issues there, I guess we'll call it. And if they get those fixed, I think they'll be right up there as one of the best defenses in the Big Ten once again, if not in the country. Bryant Haines, Indiana, that defense was amazing last year. I don't really see any argument for him being outside the top three. This is where you get into a little bit more of good, but maybe not great. Wink Martindale, he really impressed me last year with how he was able to adjust to the college game throughout the season. And they had a really tough schedule last year. So when you look at what his defense did, numbers wise, it was pretty impressive, especially with how they were able to figure things out at the end of the year, holding Ohio State to only 10 points and beating Alabama in that bowl game when they had like number one round one picks not playing. I mean, Will Johnson didn't play half the season and they were still playing really good defense. So for me, it hurts to say, but Wink Martindale, he's a top five defensive coordinator in the Big Ten. D'Anton Lynn, I didn't have him higher just because he's only had 2 years as a defensive coordinator, but that UCLA year was really impressive. USC did some really impressive things last year, but it also wasn't great. So, for me, I have him up there. That's a little bit of like a confidence thing in him, but we'll see. Ryan Walters, I wanted to have higher, but you can't have the years that you had at Purdue and be a top five Big Ten defensive coordinator to me, even if you were the head coach. Tosh Lupoi struggles with some better teams. I know you'll have some thoughts on him, Sam, so I'll leave it there. Matt Patricia, I had 8. A lot of NFL experience. Can have arguments for days about if it was him or Bill Belichick, but I'm just going to give him the credit for the NFL, how long he was there, and, move on from there. Mike Tressel would have had him higher if the season didn't end the way it did last year. Nebraska hung 44 on him. Minnesota put up 24 on him, which doesn't sound like a lot, but, for, only having 7 points to the 24, yeah, it was not a great end to the season last year. Joe Rossi, kind of doing the same thing with him that I did with Brian Lundgren. Just wasn't impressed last year. Like you said, a number of games without sacks, Sam. Didn't love that. Rod Smith, Rutgers, some experience in the NFL in 2022. He was the defensive coordinator for Duke. Felt like he did a really good job that year. I believe that was Mike Elko's first year at Duke. And you can come in as a first year and do that. I think that's rather impressive. Aaron Henry, I know Illinois fans are kind of in a little bit of a prove it thing with him right now, and I'm there a little bit. I don't know if I'd fire him at the end of the year, but there's definitely a lot of expectations for Illinois this year, so you need to see some really good defense out of them. Michael Schur, just not enough time to really know with him. Only his second or third year as a defensive coordinator. Malo from UCLA. I wasn't super impressed last year. Danny Collins at 15. He has never actually been a defensive coordinator before, but that safety room at Minnesota has just been amazing. So for me, I had to get him a little bit higher. I couldn't give him too much just because he's never, like I said, never been a defensive coordinator before, but still, I trust that whole situation. Ted Monachino, ton of experience, just never been anywhere all that long. John Butler, experience in the NFL, but never really as a defensive coordinator, so we'll see what he does. And then Tim Gurgle, how you pronounce it, at Northwestern. Some of those issues were considered to the offense last year, so I could see an argument for him needing to be higher. But at the end of the day, I don't think he's anywhere higher than bottom 3 or 4 in the Big Ten. All right, Sam, your turn.
All right, so this is following the consistent theme of me believing that Maryland is just a complete dumpster fire right now. Ted Monachino, just like you said, hasn't been anywhere really that long and hasn't had a ton of success. John Butler at 17, part of it is the defensive continuity. He's running the same scheme that Tony White did, and he has some better assistants, and he's had some success with his position, the DBs. But I have concerns there with Nebraska. I think Nebraska's going through a lot of what Ohio State is. Like, you're returning some really good players, but you're also losing a bunch of production on the better side, or at least what was, for most of last year, the better side of the football. The difference is Matt Patricia has proven experience in the NFL, and John Butler just doesn't. And Butler also doesn't have Caleb Downs. So I think it's an interesting position for Nebraska, to put it kindly. McGarigle, I have him high because I think Northwestern's defense was the better side of the football last year, but it's not like I think he's this amazing coordinator. Smith at Rutgers, I mean, I guess he's okay, but I think Harris-Simiak was probably better, and they had issues last year due to injuries and different things. Malo, I mean, all these guys are kind of the same for me from 18 to probably 14. I do think I trust Malo more because that defense last year still did play with heart. And at the end of the day, I think it's a tough place to have success at UCLA. 13th with Lupoi. Lupoi, the DC at Oregon, obviously is someone I'm very low on. Saban basically unplugged his headset a third of the way through his first year at Alabama. Pete Golding was calling plays a year before he was named the de facto DC, or the de jure DC. He was the de facto DC several months earlier because Lupoi just wasn't good at his job. And I think we're seeing the same thing at Oregon. I think the only reason why Oregon's defenses have been high in efficiency is because they feast on the weak and they have this massive talent advantage. But you saw last year, like, Washington couldn't run the ball on them to save their life and yet was able to, get to them through the air. Penn State ran for 10 yards per carry on them. I think that if Indiana played Oregon, they would have favored against them better than they did against Ohio State or would have against Penn State. And we all saw the Rose Bowl. Like, a huge part of that's because Ohio State was the best team in the country. But another part of that was Oregon's players weren't following their man-to-man assignments, or when they were in man-to-man coverage, they weren't playing it correctly. Like, it looked like they were lacking in coaching to this massive degree. It was a stark contrast from Ohio State in that game, where they just were, operating at such high efficiency. It was almost ridiculous. So I'm not high on Lupoi at all. That's why I have him below Danny Collins, Michael Scherer. Scherer had success at UNLV. Collins has just built his room so well at Minnesota, and I think Minnesota has a good defensive system, so I'm high on him. Patricia at 10. Patricia could be lower, could also be higher, depending on how you look at it. I just think 10 is this nice spot to where, like, he hasn't called the defense full time in over half a decade, but he also has several Super Bowl rings and has a lot of talent available to him. And it seems like he wants to succeed there with the resume he has. I think that's enough to put him in the middle of the pack or higher. Yeah, I mean, I think that with him, it's just a question of how does he adjust, and you'll figure out really quickly, I think, whether it was Belichick or him, or more likely than not a combination of the both. Aaron Henry at 9 and Joe Rossi at 8. I think they're pretty similar in the fact that they're good Big Ten West DCs, but we'll see if they're better than that. I mean, Illinois' defense last year, really good secondary guys, not so good defensive front, and it looks like it's going to be The disparities between those units are going to be even greater this year based on what Illinois loses and brings back. For Rossi, his defenses, they typically don't get a lot of pressure. They keep everything in front of them. That was almost to a fault last year. I still think he's good, but I can't have him ahead of Ryan Walters, Wink Martindale, or Mike Tressel, who've had all of them, at least to some level, proven success or pretty fantastic individual games over the past few seasons. Walters at 7, Martindale at 6, Tressel at 5. Martindale's at 6th because he's only been at Michigan for a season. I think there's a chance that while he did adjust to the college game as the stretch went on, that maybe some of the talent was still carrying him. And I'm curious to see what this new defense looks like. Tressel at 5 is a lot of benefit of the doubt. So if someone wants to argue that I'm overrating him, I don't have a problem with that. But I think his MSU defenses from almost a decade ago, but still were pretty good. He did a good job at Cincinnati. And I think that Wisconsin's problems in part are more talent based and relate back to Fickle or the position coaches more than Tressel. Lynn at 4 is someone who could be as high as 2. It's just a little bit of a lack of experience at DC that prevents me from having him ahead of 3 and 2. Also, because of the fact that he's going through a rebuild, so we'll see how that turns out at USC. But I expect him to have a really good defense this year. And then Haines, Parker, and Knowles. Haines is really good defensively. In fact, from what Signetti at one point said, it sounded like a lot of higher caliber schools wanted him, and Indiana was able to pay him to stay, which is impressive. Phil Parker, pretty wonderful. I think he is close to the GOAT tier, but I think Knowles is more firmly in that tier because of his success at Duke, Oklahoma State, Ohio State, Penn State. He's walking into the best position he's ever been in as well. It's like what you said. People don't realize how that 2022 defense was in truth pretty watered down and awful by Ohio State standards, like the roster, because of what 2021 was and the coaching there. It's why everyone except for Larry Johnson was fired from the defensive staff, because it wasn't just a DC issue. I think that Knowles is probably the best coordinator in the country. So I would firmly have him number 1 for DC.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to supplant Phil Parker as the best defensive coordinator in the Big Ten, but when you have the track record of Knowles, I mean, 17 years as a defensive coordinator, Oklahoma State, Duke, he's just had success everywhere he's gone. Even when he's not had, NFL caliber players, he still is able to compete and do some really good things. So yeah, I don't see any argument for anybody other than Knowles at 1 personally. All right, let's do a couple comments really fast, just because we do have a lot of opinions here, Sam, and then we'll kind of get to maybe 1 or 2 that you and I want to mention. Mish says Purdue coordinators this high really surprises me. I mean, Odom went out and made good hires. It's evident Odom is much better at running a program than Ryan Walters was. Right, Ryan Walters, good coordinator, but he just did not have the skill to run a program. Yeah, and then he's a rookie head coach. That's how it goes. So, any thoughts on the Purdue coordinators?
I don't think it's super surprising they're high, because I don't think their biggest problem with Odom is coaching. I think it's the fact that their roster is closer to an FCS school than it is to a Power 4 school.
Yeah, yeah, you're exactly right. Um, Philip says Aaron Henry getting disrespected. He has improved every year. Watch the way guys play for him. I personally think Henry will be a better head coach in the future. Yeah, I don't mean any disrespect by Aaron Henry at 13th there, Philip. I just part of me, I did lean a lot on how long guys have been defensive coordinators too, and Aaron Henry's only been a defensive coordinator for 2 years. So he took over a Ryan Walters defense that was one of the best in the country. Got worse that next year, although the points were not as bad as, or the points were much worse than the yards were. And then he improved last year, and then the yards were better than the points were. That's what I was trying to say. Sorry. But I think this season, if he is able to fix the defensive front, like Sam said, that's going to be huge for him. They got a lot of guys in the transfer portal for the defensive line, so we'll see what he does. He's definitely somebody that could jump up. Joseph says, "Why do you guys hate IU?" LOL. Well, Joseph, IU and Penn State are the only two schools that we have in the top three. Consensus. So I think that's pretty good company to be in. Don't you think so, Sam?
I don't get this. I don't get the comment at all. I mean, I'll publicly say that I think IU is a top 5 staff nationally, which is insane because that's like unthinkable, but I think that's true. I don't get where that comment would come from, Joseph. I don't at all.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, John and I both have the OC and DC as top 3 guys with room to move up. And then I don't know where you'd have Signetti as a head coach, but I'd probably only have Signetti behind Day if I were to really look at game management. I know it's really early, but when you punch above your weight class that much, you like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
He was joking with us. Okay, all right. I was wondering if you were
sense.
joking with us, Joseph. But Zach's not here. Everybody jokes that Zach hates Indiana. You got us, Joseph. Good one there. All right. Okay. What coordinators do you want to bring up, or one coordinator do you want to bring up that we kind of differ on here, Sam? I know Martindale we differ on, Tressel we differ on a little bit, Rossi to an extent. Yeah. What coordinator you want to bring up here?
We can do Tressel and Martindale.
Okay. All right. So Tressel for me, like I said, into the season, Nebraska scoring 44 on Minnesota putting up 24 on them. But at the same time, I can understand if somebody wants to say the offense was just that bad, felt like it kind of got away from them, right? I mean, people consider Tony White a good defensive coordinator, and he let Indiana score 56 on them. And you could definitely point to the offense for some of those issues why that happened there. I look at Tressel and I think if I'm really gonna rate a guy high because of what he did 2 schools ago, I don't know if I can do that. For me,
That's
I need to
fair.
see it at the current school. He was good at Cincinnati, but again, that was group of 5, so good at group of 5. I want to see it in the Big Ten. So Tressel is definitely somebody that I think puts together some really, really good game plans. He had a stretch last year where teams scored like it was like 7 points in like 3 games or something like that. Or it was 10 points in 3 games. It was really, really impressive. But at the same time, you face some of the better offenses. Somebody figures you out, and it's hard for him. What are your thoughts?
So I mean, there's not much else I can say outside of what you said. I mean, I think sadly, and maybe this is just me not assessing it correctly, but I think kind of the team quit after the OC was fired. And it
Mm.
felt like that looking at how they played against Nebraska and even Minnesota, because they looked lifeless there. Meanwhile, they were fighting hard against Penn State, fighting hard against Oregon. Iowa killed them before all that happened, but I will also say that I think Iowa at home last year, once Sullivan started at QB, was probably invincible. I don't know who could have stopped mobile QB, Caleb Johnson, several NFL guards. Like that doesn't seem like a combination that most defenses, at least like defensive front wise, could handle. And Wisconsin's defensive front was bad last year. That's why they ran a 3-3-5 and then even a 2-4-5 sometimes, because their front was really that bad. Better this year, should be better this year. I do agree with that criticism though. Like this is put up or shut up year for
Mm-hmm.
him, honestly. Thankfully, he returns a lot. As for Wink Martindale, I just can't get some of the first few games out of my mind. And I think the Ohio State game was good. The Alabama one, good too, but not to the same degree. I think that game wasn't quite as impressive. Made sense because the opt-outs. But I don't know. I think that the Big Ten, it's less of me being low on Martindale and more of me being high on the Big Ten DCs. Like, I think Martindale's great. I just think that Lynn, Haines, and Parker are all probably elite, and then Knowles is basically up there with Kirby Smart at Alabama, is like being that good. So I don't hate Martindale. I mean, I don't think he's better than Mike McDonald or Jesse Minter, the previous two DCs from Michigan, but he's pretty great. He'd probably be higher if Michigan were in any other conference. I just think that he's not quite as proven as the guys ahead of him. Hope to be wrong, though.
Yeah, I mean that's the big thing, right? Is like when you look at Big Ten defensive coordinators, if you're in the top 6 or 7, you're considered some of the best defensive coordinators in college football because of just how many good defensive coordinators there are in the Big Ten and how solid defense is. Kinetic here says Wink equals best DC. Uh, in other conferences, he might be, but like I said, it's just it's it is that Jim Knowles and Phil Parker and Bryant Haines that are above him that you know kicks him outside of the top 30. And he says 20 years in the NFL and Super Bowl ring equals proven. Yeah, I you'd have Matt Patricia over him though if you were gonna say that. I mean, Matt
Yeah,
Patricia has more
that's the
rings,
ultimate
so
problem with
yeah,
that
so
argument.
yeah. So, but I'm not arguing with you, Kinetic. I think fourth is insanely impressive, and even where Sam has him at 6, I think that's really impressive too. So, yeah, really good stuff from Wink Martindale last year. I've learned through this that I value finishing the year well much more than starting the year slow, or obviously ending the year slow or anything like that. So, all right, let's do the same thing we did before. Who are some coaches that are lower on your rankings that you think could jump up, or maybe just take a big leap in general next season?
Patricia could, but I think that's too easy, and I'm not leaning towards that happening. I will say, though, that Lupoi, I don't think can. I don't think that's going to work. I'll boldly put here that I think Lanning will have to make a choice to either fire him or you actually can win a national title. I don't think that's going to work. Um, I think that Danny Collins could have a huge rise. I think that I would say it's Rob Smith, right? Not Rod Smith. Rob Smith.
Yeah, Rob, I put it incorrectly.
Oh no, you're good. It's just making sure. Rob Smith and Danny Collins, I think, would be risers for me. I could say Aaron Henry, but to already be in the top half or top 2/3 in the Big Ten basically means you're at least competent at your job or should be. I would look at Rob Smith and Danny Collins with the talent they have and with the opportunity they have. And then I think the layups are Martindale. Michigan could have a top 3 defense this year. If they do, then he has to move up on the list. Patricia, if he does well, has to be higher than 10th or even 8th for what you have him on the list. And that's the same. I mean, there's so much opportunity, but I'm going to go with Smith and Collins just because they're smaller schools, ranked lower, not a lot to them quite yet, but with the schedules they have more than enough opportunities to prove themselves.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you there on Rob Smith and Collins. I'm already projecting Smith a little bit based off what happened a few years ago at Duke and his NFL experience. But another one I'll throw in there as well, just because, I mean, he spent a lot of time in the NFL, was really good with defensive backs. And I got a lot of people, a lot of Nebraska fans telling me they were very concerned about their defensive backs. And I don't really go back and forth with people on Twitter a whole lot with my podcast account just because not everybody knows who I am that's, saying stuff. So I feel like it's kind of cowardly if they don't know who I am. So I don't typically do
Understandable.
that. But I was like, guys, why are you worried about defensive backs? John Butler spent like years in the NFL as a defensive backs coach. Like I know he wasn't a defensive coordinator, but if there's anything that I would hope that he would be able to get right on this defense, it would be the defensive back. So maybe I'm missing something that Nebraska fans are thinking. You're more in tune with the Nebraska fan base than I am. What are your thoughts on the defensive backs for next year, Sam?
Um, wow, this is tough. Um,
I
I
didn't
mean,
mean to make
Nebraska
I didn't
fan.
mean to make you have an entire
No, no,
video
no,
on
no,
it
no,
because we
no.
could do an entire video on Nebraska defensive backs if we wanted to.
Yeah, no, you're good. I like the challenging question. I would put Butler in the same category almost as Lupoi. I don't think that's going to work out at all. Um, and maybe that's bold and premature, but I mean, DB was the weakest link for Nebraska last year. It was for the year prior too, but no one except for Michigan could exploit it. And then Colorado could, but their O line was just so bad that it was hard to, you know, to a certain degree when your O line is awful. I mean, like Michigan, Ohio State was like this last year when the O line was just, for Ohio State getting set and it was only 2 games removed from McLaughlin. They passed more than they ran, but because of the circumstances and how it worked, it was just so hard to pass. Well, that was Colorado, Nebraska in 2023. And I just don't think people realize that the DBs were weak because they played so many inept offenses in the West. And then this year, when you face Curtis Rourke, when you face Will Howard, when you got Shadur Sanders, so they did well against, but he was really the only one they did well against. And again, Colorado's O line wasn't that good. So I'm kind of already out on Butler, but I also hope I'm wrong because I like Nebraska and I like their fans, and it would be awesome to see them do well. But you know what? You're the first person I've heard, have faith in him, and I think there are good reasons for that. I mean, he was not a bad DB's coach in the NFL at all.
Yeah, he stuck around in the NFL, and really, at the end of the day, if you stick around, that means you're doing your job, right? So I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not saying he will for sure be top half of the Big Ten next season, but he's just one that I've not heard a whole lot of people feel confident in at all. There's a lot of people projecting Nebraska as a top 25 team and stuff, but a lot of that is offensive based. If John Butler can get this defense together and create a strong secondary, I think they can do some really interesting things next year. Of course, I'm also the person that said multiple times, I've put my faith in Nebraska too many times. I'm not going to hurt myself again. I am going to let them show me before I put my faith in them. Our resident Nebraska fan, Pitt Snipe Husker, he says, we have some really good depth at defensive back, missed a few top recruits and transfers, but we might not need them with our returning starters and potential young fellows rising. Well, you might not need them with that schedule either, because that's probably the best schedule in the Big Ten next season. Pitt Snipe Husker, that Nebraska schedule is very favorable for you guys, and if John Butler can't do it this year, I don't know when he's going to do it. So he has to have a good year this year, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
mean, they have a lot of returning starters, and then Sear Wright is probably an All-American, at least contender, like someone flirting with All-American potential at corner. I, they're they're concerned defensively in my mind, and I know we're actually over time, so I'll just keep this very brief. Their concern is just all they're losing on the D line. Like when I look at their late November game against Penn State, that's a game where my mind intuitively goes 400 rushing yards, 8 yards per carry. The good news is, like you said, with their schedule, I mean, if Butler gets the defense right and Holgerson does what I think you and I both think he will on offense, that's a team that can contend for a playoff berth with that schedule.
Yeah, for sure. Nebraska, them, and Washington were my two teams that I said early on, watch out. These are two teams that haven't made, or I shouldn't say haven't made, because Washington did make it, but people aren't projecting as to make or possibly even be in the top 25 that I think could get there. So, yeah, always interesting when we bring up Nebraska. Pitt Snipe Husker says Butler wasn't a big enough name to satisfy a lot of Husker fans. I'm good with him, but we'll all learn about his scheme this year. Yeah, sometimes you don't always need the big name. Just hire the guy that can coach defense. That's all you got to do.